Good morning, and thank you for joining us. For the last few Sunday mornings, we've been looking at the Old Testament prophets and what they had to say to the people of Israel. This morning, I want us to look into the book of Micah. We're going to be looking in Micah chapter 6. The prophet Micah was sent by God to foretell judgment upon Judah for their sinful ways. Micah was a contemporary of Isaiah, and both of them ministered to the southern kingdom of Judah. Micah prophesied against immorality and against social injustices and the oppression of the poor by the rich and the very powerful. In verse 1, Micah makes clear that God had a controversy with his people. He then goes on to list what God had done for them. God had led them out of bondage and slavery in Egypt and into a land flowing with milk and honey. He had given them godly leadership with Moses and Aaron and also with Joshua. But they quickly forgot about God and they drifted into sin. They had kept the outward trappings of religion, but they had turned a blind eye to many injustices taking place all around them. In verse 8, Micah asks this resounding question: what does the Lord require of you? And then he answers the question: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now that sounds simple, doesn't it? Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. But when you study the book of Micah and understand the context in which Micah spoke these words and the impact that it had on those who heard them, you realize that it's much more than just a glib motto. Now, to understand Micah, we need to understand some things about the history of Israel. We need to go back to when the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. God called Moses and spoke to him from a burning bush, and then sent him to Pharaoh with the message, "Let my people go." And you know the rest of the story. God used Moses to lead the people out of bondage to the promised land. And God established a covenant with them. I will be your God, and you will be my people. But it was a two-way street. And there were things that God required of Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Leviticus 19, verse 18, love your neighbor as yourself. And oh yes, don't murder, don't lie, don't steal. Be faithful to your wife or husband. Don't be jealous of your neighbors and want what they have. And Leviticus 6:12, be careful you don't forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. God said, when you get to the promised land, don't forget me. Micah preached during a time when things were going very well. Things were going great economically and politically, and the people had forgotten God. The rich and the powerful exploited the vulnerable and created inequalities of wealth and influence. And Micah condemned Judah's leaders for injustices against the poor and the powerless. But when confronted, the leaders of the nation would say, we're good Jews. We go to the temple every Sabbath, we offer sacrifices, and we give to the temple's coffers. What does God expect from us anyway? And Micah said, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. These are three attributes that God wants to see lived out in our lives. The word justice means treating people rightly, impartially, and fairly. The word appears 125 times in the Old Testament, and the word righteousness is often linked with it. Righteousness is simply rightness. things that are right in the eyes of God. As Christians, our understanding of justice is based on the holiness of God. It's not based on community standards or the demands of some interest group or even on the laws of any given state or locality. Are all our laws just? Of course not. It's never been true that all of our laws conform to God's standard. Even the highest court in our land has in its history allowed unjust laws to exist. For some, the whims of the times define justice. But the times are always changing. Justice isn't what some social movement says that it is or what some political commentator says it is. Justice is what God says it is. God and God alone is truly just. Micah was called by God to get the people back in line with him. He was saying that they had a responsibility to correct the injustices that existed. A commitment to justice reveals itself in the way we behave toward our fellow human beings, the way we treat them. There are 9 words associated with the word justice in the Bible: widow, fatherless, orphans, poor, hungry, stranger or immigrant, needy, weak, and oppressed. You won't find the word rich. In fact, rich is often associated with injustice. Micah was concerned about the widows, the fatherless, the orphans, the poor, the hungry, the strangers, the needy, the weak, and the oppressed. Now, there's still a great deal of prejudice and injustice throughout the world today. And that's why getting the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ to people the world over is so important. Because Jesus transforms people so that they want to do what is right. God instills his love into our hearts. The gospel promises forgiveness of sin and reconciliation to God and acceptance in the beloved. The gospel is for the oppressed of all types. It's good news for the forgotten, the beaten down, the shut out, and the left behind. Our society today is so polarized, and the tendency to see everything through a partisan political lens is so great. But it leads us to seeing only part of the real story while missing other parts. For example, one side says punish evildoers. The other side wants to rectify injustice. And there's a failure to see that there's a place and need for both, of course, to be done. Psalm 72 verses 2 and 4 say, "May the king judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May he judge the poor of the people and save the children of the needy and break in pieces the oppressor." Judgment must be handed down to evildoers, and oppressors must be punished, and the cause of the needy and poor must be defended, and the oppressed delivered. You know, Facebook has been an eye-opener for me. Some of the opinions people express have surprised me. But the good thing about it is that it offers us an opportunity to speak the truth in love to people and to take a stand for what is just and right. And there are those who are doing just that. Now, what about mercy? We're to do justice, but what about mercy? God had certainly shown mercy to Israel, and he wanted them to be kind to one another. That meant they needed to show mutual respect and helpfulness and loving concern for one another. God requires that we love mercy and that we show compassion and goodwill to others. We're witnessing right now a time of sickness and death in America that hasn't been seen since the flu epidemic of 1918. Our nation has suffered the loss of over 175,000 people to the coronavirus. And many have died alone on ventilators in hospitals without family members by their side. Meanwhile, there's no national policy or plan to fight the virus, and people are arguing over whether they should be made to wear a mask or not. If there was ever a time to love mercy and show compassion, and for the American people to pull together, it's now. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Walk humbly with your God. Micah was pointing to the sin of pride. Judah had become filled with pride. When we think ourselves superior to others, we're not walking humbly before God. Walking is a metaphor for living a certain kind of life. Walking humbly with God implies sensitivity to God's instructions. It means to see the world through the eyes of God and to act as the Bible tells us, as He wants us to act. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. God wants us to be compassionate and love others, especially those whom Jesus calls the least of these. God's expectations haven't changed. As Christians, we have received the gift of God's love. We've been delivered from the slavery and bondage of sin, and we need to live as Jesus wants us to live and love as He wants us to love. A little boy was attending church in which there were beautiful stained glass windows, and on each window was a different apostle. It made an impression on him, and when he was asked by someone what he thought a saint was, his answer was this: a saint is a person that the light shines through. God wants His light to shine through us. Jesus said in Matthew 5:16, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Jesus also said, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this will all know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Thank you for joining us this morning, and may God bless you, and I hope you do have a great day. Thank you.